My name is Josh Rouse, executive pastor here at Village. I get the privilege of hanging out with you incredible folks each week, so excited to be with you. This summer, we've been taking a road trip together, and many of you have taken a road trip. In fact, the way we love to preach during the summertime is we like to have a message that's kind of overarching, a big theme that runs through the summer, and it's not necessarily building on each week. That way, if you go on vacation or when you go on vacation, that you don't have to come back and like, oh, I guess we can't go back to Village because we missed last week. No, jump right back in. And by the way, you can always catch up online as well. So we've been talking about road trips this summer, and we've been sharing stories about road trips. We've been talking about vacation stories, and last week we found out that you don't want to be lined up mano a mano with one Andrew Brown at Disney World trying to get a table, right? He told us he'd hurt somebody trying to get that table for him. I shared with you a story a couple of weeks ago about when Beth and I got married in our honeymoon, trying to get to our destination. It involved a lot more time, a missed flight than we were planning on. In fact, I had a conversation with one of you following that message. And compared to my story, your struggle was tenfold, right? What you went through trying to get to your honeymoon. So we had those kind of stories. We've heard some mission trip stories about Andrew shared us how when they went to Norfolk, Virginia a few years ago, it took them 7 buses to get there, right? They destroyed 6 of them on their way to and from Norfolk, Virginia. And we're excited this week as our group comes back from Mission Serve, undoubtedly with their own mission stories of the trip that they just had. We heard one this morning with Sarah and her little boombox, so that's fantastic. Now, when I was growing up, and for many of you, you share this similar experience, a road trip was one of the most boring things in the world to me, right, as a little kid. It was so boring. It was right up there with going to the dentist, right? I couldn't stand going on a road trip because I was that hyperactive kid who's stuck now in the car in a seatbelt for 4-ish hours, right? If we were going to Panama City, which we frequented on vacation when I was a kid. So it was me and my brother before my sister came along in the back seat, right? And of course, what happens when you're a little hyperactive and you're bored? You start messing with each other. That's right, Lenita, you know. We start messing with each other, and invariably one of us gets in trouble. And so this keeps happening. So, but these road trips were so boring. It was just a temptation to get in trouble for me. And those road trips actually they were revolutionized when my brother came home with a Nintendo Game Boy. You remember the Game Boy? The Game Boy was the first portable video game player. And he got that for his birthday or for Christmas. And man, the road trips changed forever. In fact, I tell my kids, they'll be like, we're bored. Are you kidding me? You have video games you can play. You have a Kindle you can read. You have movies you can watch. Let me tell you about when I was a little boy. And they love it. Don't your kids love it when you go into when I was a little boy stories? Right? Remember when I was growing up with this story? Yeah, we get it, Dad. All you had was your Hardy Boys books to get you to Florida. It's like, yeah, that's right. Me and Frank and Joe and Biff, we're going, right? We were going to make it. But road trips were so boring, so we had to figure out a way to entertain ourselves, right? A way to entertain ourselves. And one of the ways we would do that was by playing games, making up games. We'd play Punch Bug. Familiar with Punch Bug? You see a VW Beetle, and you punch the person next to you, right? The secret to Punch Bug, you always want to play with someone smaller than you, right? So you can just pow, let them have it, and then they hit you, and like, oh, I'm sorry, was that you? I didn't feel anything. You did that. You did the collect them all with with plate tags, right? With license plates. You know, got one from New York. You get one from wherever. We would do that. See who could get the most license plates. And then one of the things that I learned to do over those years was to enjoy a good bumper sticker, right? I love a good bumper sticker. Now, with that being said, there's plenty of bad bumper stickers out there, right? Plenty of ones you're like, oh gosh, what were they thinking? But there's plenty of really, really good ones. And I thought this morning to get us started, I'd share with you some incredible bumper stickers this morning as we get rolling, okay? So, many of you are familiar with, in fact, I just passed one this morning on the way to church, the baby on board, right, sticker, the baby on board. Of course, and what this sticker is telling you, right, what the sticker is telling you is that there's a baby on board, right, and this is the bumper sticker, adults on board, we want to live too, right? What the sticker is telling you is hey, there's a baby on board, so drive a little more carefully than you normally do because there's a baby on board. We want to take care of the baby, right? Don't honk your horn. Don't turn your music up too loud because of the baby. But yeah, this bumper sticker nails it, right? Adults on board, we want to live too, right? So carry this one around. There's adults on board as well. I love this next one. The fact that no one understands you doesn't mean you're an artist, right? I feel that one sometimes, right? The fact no one understands you doesn't mean you're an artist. And the next one I embody, right? I live this next one. On a minivan, the bumper sticker says, I used to be cool. I used to be cool. I do drive a minivan. Mine actually should probably say I used to be cool because our story with the minivan is that Lane is due in August of 2005. Well, we're looking for a vehicle. Beth is in the need of a new vehicle. And we're car shopping leading up to Lane coming into the world. And so in May of that year, we actually find a good deal. We're having a family, so all right, we'll get a van. We find a good deal on a van. And in May, Beth and I start driving a minivan without kids, right? So like I used to be cool, right? That's how uncool that was. But that was our experience with the minivan. Many of you are familiar with the stickers that say 13.1 or 26.2. Right? Half marathon or ran a full marathon. My personal favorite is this one, the 0.0, I don't run, right? A lot of hands being raised. 0.0, in fact, negative 12, right? Put that up for me. 0.0, I do love that one. And then finally, maybe you've seen out and about, and maybe you have this bumper sticker where it's the stick family, right? The stick figure family, the mom, the dad, you got the kids. Some of them have pets on it. Others have, they're done in like Disney theme, or I've seen one, it was Super Mario theme, right? And those are all cute and wonderful. This one was great. There's the spouses, and instead of kids, there's money next to them. I don't have kids, I have money, right? So that's how that works. I'm glad that they enlightened us there. And of course, one of the bumper stickers that we've seen for years that I can remember as far back as I go is seeing the God is my co-pilot bumper sticker, right? Have you seen that? God is my co-pilot, right? And here's the deal. I didn't go look through the parking lot this morning to see if anybody had one. So here's the deal with this bumper sticker. It's funny. There's a little bit of a theological issue with this bumper sticker because essentially what we want is God to be our pilot, right? But that's for another time. But this idea is actually, as the more I thought about it, it's kind of good because what this is espousing is that God is traveling with me, right? We're traveling together. Right? And a traveling buddy, a road trip partner, can make all the difference, can it? Right? When you're traveling with the right road trip buddy or people, it can make all the difference in the world, can it? Two examples of this. I had a friend recently who was traveling with his mother-in-law, okay? No Snickers, that's good. First, two disclaimers. One, I love my mother-in-law. She's the best, okay? Two, this is not a stereotypical mother-in-law joke. This was my friend riding with his mother-in-law, okay? And to hear him tell it, this 6-hour trip felt like 12, right? It was just one of those trips, like, and he was telling about it later. He's like, it just felt like we were in the car for so long because it was kind of the wrong traveling partner for him in that setting. Contrast that with when you're traveling with old friends. Right? When you're traveling with friends from high school or friends from college or friends that were on your team back in the day or friends that were in your sorority, and man, you just get in the car and you just start chit-chatting away. You're telling stories about the old days. You're janking on each other. Does anybody use that anymore? Janking? When we were growing up, we say janking on, like you're ripping on each other. Right? You're just making fun of each other. You're telling stories about your families, their families, and all of a sudden that 6-hour trip feels like 3, doesn't it? Because the right traveling buddy, the right traveling partner makes all the difference in the world. And we're going to look at a story today where Jesus takes a road trip. Literally, Jesus takes a road trip. Now, if you're familiar with the Gospels, Jesus is traveling all the time, right? He is all over the place throughout the Gospels. In fact, if Fitbits were around, and Jesus had one when he was doing his earthly ministry, his Fitbit would probably read infinity, right? That he just kept walking and walking. He's all over the place. But we're going to look at an account today in the pages of Luke, good old Dr. Luke, the detail-centric gospel writer, records this story at the end of his gospel account about Jesus taking a road trip with some folks. And this account provides us with such an interesting map, an interesting GPS, if you will, on how we go about the seasons of our lives. And we'll land on that toward the end of this. But this is such a fascinating account about Jesus and these traveling buddies as Jesus takes a road trip. Okay, and so we're going to be in Luke chapter 24 in verse 13. If you have your Bibles and want to follow along, feel free to do that. It will be on the screens as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read a little bit and then we're going to talk a little bit, okay? So that's what we'll do as we get going. So Luke 24, verse 13. We're told, now that same day, two of them, these two folks, were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. All right, some background into this real quick. Now that same day, the day that Luke is referring to, because Luke is interested in you knowing the wheres, the whys, the hows, the whats, and the whens. The same day that Luke is referring to is the day of resurrection, that Jesus has been raised from the dead, right? And on this same day, these two folks are leaving Jerusalem and heading to Emmaus, right? And they're talking about everything that had happened because by now, some reports of Jesus' resurrection are beginning to make their way to his followers, right? It's beginning to be known that Jesus has been seen post-crucifixion, post-death. He's been seen on that Sunday. And it's this day that these folks are heading back to Emmaus, which leads us to assume something about them. There's a chance that they had heard these reports and maybe just kind of, well, that's whatever, we heard that, but that's who knows? Who knows? We're heading back. We got to get back. Got work tomorrow, right? We got to get back to our regularly scheduled programming. And we're going to learn that one of these folks is a guy named Cleopas, right? We're going to learn that here in a minute. But his guy named Cleopas, and it's been wondered about who the other traveling partner was. And many have suggested that maybe it was Cleopas's wife. Some have suggested it was just a friend or another follower of Jesus. And these folks are heading back to Emmaus from Jerusalem. And there's probably what had happened is they had gone to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, right? This huge holiday, and they had gone to Jerusalem, much like many folks will be descending upon this area later in the week to celebrate July 4th. They've been celebrating this holiday together, and now it's over, so they're going back home, okay? So that's kind of what's going on here as Luke begins telling us this story. And then verse 15, it says, as they talked and discussed these things with each other, as they're talking about all that had gone on that weekend, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. All right, Jesus himself comes up. All right, this same Jesus who just a few days ago was crucified, was buried, and now is alive again, comes and walks along with them, takes this road trip with them, right? So this is the setting here. But we're told they were kept from recognizing him. And many have wondered what this phrase right here means. They were kept from recognizing. Like, was there some spiritual force keeping them from recognizing Jesus? Did they not recognize him because somehow in the resurrection that his body had been transformed and there was something wholly other about it? Like they just didn't realize what was going on and they didn't understand it. What had happened to Jesus? Could it have been that they had sort of followed at a distance, maybe Jesus, and wouldn't have recognized him? We don't really know what's going on with this not being able to recognize him bit. But this is something that can happen to all of us, right? Who knows with this, them being kept from recognizing what was going on here. But we've all had these kind of moments where you should have recognized somebody, but you didn't. When I was in college, I worked at a Christian bookstore. And we sold all sorts of things at this bookstore. We had, of course, there were books at the bookstore. We had, there was an extensive music collection there. We sold precious moments in the 90s, you know, like you did. So we had those. We had testaments. Anybody remember testaments? Right? No, nobody. Good. Oh, Robbie does. Great. Fantastic. Testaments were Christian mints, right? They're like, keep your breath fresh forever. Get it? They didn't. You like that? Wow. Yeah, they didn't actually do that, by the way. My dating life proved it. But anyway, they didn't do that. So testaments. So I'm working at this bookstore. And this guy comes in, right? He comes in, and he asks for an album by a guy named Bebo Norman. Maybe you remember Bebo, maybe you don't. Bebo Norman was a pretty popular Christian artist, turn of the century, late 90s. And Bebo actually happened to be from Columbus, where I grew up and happened to be working at the time. And this guy comes in looking for Bebo's album. Unfortunately, we had sold out of his album. Bebo was a big deal in Columbus. And so he comes in looking for the album, and I'm like, oh gosh, we don't have, we sold out of those albums. But Bebo was actually on tour and had come to town that weekend with another band, right? And so they were called Caveman's Call. Maybe you remember Caveman's Call. Well, Caveman's Call's album, B for Bebo and C for Caveman's Call. So being the slick Christian bookstore salesman that I was like, we don't have those, but he is on tour with these guys. Maybe you'd like their album. And what was about to come out of my mouth was this. I was about to say, I'm not a huge fan. My brother likes them a lot, but I'm not really into their music. Notice I said about to, thank the Lord. I didn't say. Because before I could get that out of my mouth, this guy goes, oh, well, I'm in that band. Woo! Thank goodness I didn't say what I was going to say. And it's funny, as I looked, I'm like, oh, that is you. Now, here's the deal. I knew what Caveman's Call looked like. I'd seen them in concert. I'd heard their stuff. I just didn't put together that day, this guy from Caveman's Call would be in this Christian bookstore, right, talking to little old me. There's a guy named Derek Webb who'd go on to have a solo career. I just didn't recognize Mr. Webb that day, and thank goodness I didn't say what I was thinking of saying. I will say I did come to appreciate Caveman's Call as I got a little older. But these folks don't recognize Jesus walking among him, right? And maybe Luke can give us some insight into that later, what he means by this phrase, but they didn't recognize Jesus. And so Jesus comes up and walks with them. And I have to imagine that Jesus must have been one of the greatest road trip buddies ever, right? He must have been one of the greatest road trip partners ever. And if I'm traveling with Jesus, I am like that 4-year-old, just chock full of questions, man. Jesus, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And what about that? Why? And I just start asking those why questions. And Jesus, in his grace and in his mercy, is going to put up with my ridiculousness, right? As I just keep asking questions. I imagine Jesus being the greatest road trip partner. In fact, he even kind of plays with these folks as they're walking. Verse 17 says, he asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, we met him earlier, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened here in these days? Right? Are you the only person? This whole deal with Jesus and his crucifixion and his followers, and the people loved Jesus, and they turned on Jesus and the Roman government. They tried him and they killed him, they crucified him, and then supposedly he's been raised from the dead. Are you the only one who doesn't know this story? Cleopas gets smart with Jesus, right? What an incredible line there. He gets snarky with Jesus. Can you imagine, right? Can you imagine? Now, Jesus could do any number of things right here, right? He could be like, how dare you, right? And come at him or something. But I love what Jesus does. He says, what things? What things? No, do tell. Tell me what has happened in Jerusalem over the past few days. Inquiring minds want to know, right? Tell a brother what happened. I want to know. It's funny, we tend to read our Bibles kind of like Cleopas and his friend here, standing still, faces downcast, right? Ooh, next page, right? We'll read our Bibles like that. This is funny, okay? This is funny. Read your Bible. There's so much good stuff in the Scriptures. I had a hermeneutics teacher one time in seminary, hermeneutics being the study of texts, and in context. And he said, man, when there's funny stuff in the Bible, laugh at it. Because it's there to encourage you, right? See that in there. Jesus says, no. What things? Do tell me. We need to see the humor in this. This is a funny, funny scene. And then Cleopas says this about Jesus of Nazareth. And then he begins to lay out the whole story for Jesus himself. Okay? Cleopas and his traveling buddy, they are the greatest missionaries in the history of the world. Some would tell you it's Mother Teresa. Others would tell you it's a guy named William Carey. Maybe say, oh, they're the greatest missionaries. Cleopas and his friend are trying to convert Jesus. They're trying to win Jesus to Jesus, right? They're sharing their faith with Jesus. Greatest missionaries ever, right? They're like, man, this guy needs to know the story about Jesus. They try to get Jesus to accept Jesus, right? It's this incredible picture. Jesus like, what things? He's like, well, let me tell you about this guy, Jesus of Nazareth. Well, he's this, and Jesus is listening to this story. And Cleopas does a beautiful job of telling the story of Jesus, right? He's crucified, the Roman government, and now there's reports that he's alive again. It's incredible. Right, and he ends his little soliloquy there to Jesus by basically saying that the women went in to see him. And then the disciples went, but they didn't find him. And then Jesus jumps back into the conversation in verse 25. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And he's saying, this stuff has happened. You should have known this was coming. As a Jewish one looking for the Messiah, you should have seen that this was what was said about the Messiah. And it's interesting. I used to read this, how foolish you are, as kind of an attack, right? Oh, you're so dumb. But I don't think that's what Jesus is doing here. I think he's just saying, hey, you're missing it. I don't want you to miss it. You're missing it. How foolish you are. And then in verse 27, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Jesus teaches them about Jesus through the story of Scripture. Jesus, the point of the whole thing, tells them the point of the whole thing. This is the story from Moses through the prophets of who the Messiah is supposed to be, right? Can you imagine how incredible that trip must have been? As Jesus taught, these folks had front row seats to the whole picture of eternity, right? Of what has been. Jesus telling them this story. What an incredible road trip partner he must have been. Luke continues. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. We don't really know why, but he continues on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, right? No, this has been awesome. Please stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. So Jesus, he goes in to stay with them. Again, they still don't know this is Jesus, right? But they are so fascinated with this guy and the stories he is telling and the picture he is painting. So say, please don't go. Hang some more, right? Let's talk. Let's have a meal. Continue telling us about Jesus, right? Continue telling us. And then when he was at the table with them, so they go in, they stop, they have some supper together. He, Jesus, took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he began to give it to them. Then, that's a big then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. Okay, some of us in here are very, very logical, right? We're very analytical in how we think, and we're like, what? He disappeared from their sight, like just gone? What? How does that happen? Right? Just disappears from their sight. And it's easy to get tripped up on that part of this story. But don't get tripped up, because if a once dead man can go on a road trip, then I can believe that maybe he could disappear, right? I mean, if we're defying the laws of physics and of nature, then I have no problem being on board with Jesus doing this in front of them. Isn't this fascinating, though? It takes them sitting down to eat to realize who he is, right? This is just this normal meal. It's like you're going to go have lunch here in a little bit, right? And you're going to hang out and you're going to eat together. That's what's going on here. They are having a meal. But it's fascinating that they didn't recognize him until they sat down to have this meal together, right? Even when he's preaching to them, right? Incredibly preaching to them, they don't realize who he is. But they finally come to see him as who he is in the common, ordinary, just having a meal together, right? Just having a meal. Well, what happened? What changed? So in my reading this week, I was reading about a guy taking a trip to, he was visiting Jerusalem and then actually went as part of the trip to Emmaus. And the guide at the time was describing this event, this story right here. And the guide offered an explanation to what was going on here. That the guide demonstrated physically how Jesus would have broken the bread and then handed it to them. Right? And the guide says that as he does this with his palms upturned, that they would have seen the scars in his hands. Right? And they are able to recognize him in that moment when they see the marks of his suffering. Ding, 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 ding. Holy cow. Right? This is incredible. Right? Can you imagine? Can you just imagine? Like me being so thankful I didn't tell Derek Webb that I hated his band. Right? Them being like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? You know those moments you're like, are you kidding? This is who I've been hanging with this whole time? You're that person? Oh my goodness. Can you imagine what flooded their hearts and minds in that moment? And then he's gone. Right? He's gone. And I love, they turn to each other in verse 32. So they ask each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Were not our hearts burning? There was just something about that, right? Wasn't that incredible? What you felt it, I felt it, we all felt it was incredible. Were not our hearts burning? And so what they do is they hightail it back to Jerusalem, right? And they go and they find the disciples. And the disciples, do you remember what they're doing at the time? They're hiding. They're scared to death. They're worried that the Roman government's coming for them. You stole the body, right? They are scared to death. They're behind locked doors. And these guys go to them. And it's almost the Christmas morning effect, right? We've seen him. Oh, let us tell you the story. We've seen him. It was incredible, right? And so what do? They tell the story. They tell the story. What had just happened to them? And Luke actually records, says, as they tell their story, Jesus pops up again, right? And then he says, as you do when you just appear out of thin air, he says, peace be with you, right? Don't be afraid, right? It's me, right? And they have this incredible encounter with him. And I love how Luke tells the story because he tells it in such a way that you and I can see ourselves in it, in such a way to help us live our lives. And notice, they go back to Jerusalem to be with the disciples. And what happens? They go back, right? They meet Jesus. They have this incredible encounter with Jesus, right? These two people. And then they hurry to tell others about their experience. And what happens? The others see him too. Christian, isn't this our experience? Right? That we experience Jesus. Someone helps us see him for who he is. We're able to experience him. And then what do? We go tell someone else. We're able to be that someone for somebody else, helping them see him as well. We get to play a role in this as well. And what's so fascinating about this, and what I want to spend our last few minutes on, is this meal that Jesus and the friends have there. And it's fascinating. Again, in my reading this week, I read an account of a guy who says that notice how Jesus serves the meal. And I'm thinking, man, I've read this 100 times. Okay, that's what he does. He serves the meal in this way. But the guy was saying that this is Jesus' pattern, how he serves meals. That he does the same thing when he feeds the 5,000, earlier in the gospel accounts, He does the same thing at the Last Supper. He takes the bread, he gives thanks, or he blesses it, he breaks it, and then he gives it to them. That's what he does. That's what he does. And this is instructive for you and me. As we're on our road trips of life, right, traveling through different seasons, different stages of life, this is so instructive for you and I. Because this guy was saying, this tends to be the pattern in how God works in our life and how Jesus sets his plan in motion in our lives. And it's even a pattern that he uses in Scripture as you read the stories of Scripture. Consider Joseph of the Old Testament. God takes him out of this well, right, where his brothers have left him to die, takes him out of there. Right? He blesses them, and Joseph in the Old Testament rises to this place of prominence in the house of Potiphar. But then Joseph is broken by being left in the dungeon, right, to just stay there. He's forgotten by this guy that he helps. But then God gives him to the nation of Egypt, becoming the second most powerful man in the whole world because of these government policies he had set up. Right? God takes him, God blesses him, God breaks him, and then God gives him to the folks around him. Consider Moses, right? Moses, who was sent in a little basket floating down the river in an effort to evade the infanticide that was going on, right? And then Moses is taken out of that basket. In fact, Moses' name means taken or drawn out of. And then he's blessed by growing up in the house of Pharaoh, right? Growing up in the house of Pharaoh. And then Moses, though, is broken in the wilderness before he's given to the people of Israel to start this new nation. Consider Jesus, right? Taken from Mary's womb, right? Blessed with the ability to teach the truth, perform miracles. He's purifying this religious system of his day with his grace. And he's broken on Calvary for the sins of the world. And now he's been given to the world as the Savior of the world. There's a great chance in your life today you're in one of these seasons, right? That you're in one of these seasons. You're either in the taking, the blessing, the breaking, or the giving, right? And we want to see ourselves in these in the next few minutes and talk about them just for a second. Because when you're in the taking stage, let's just talk about that. When you're in the taking stage, it can often be uncomfortable, can it? God will take you out maybe of your comfort zone. We had these students in the band, everybody went to Mission Serve this past week, right? They experienced that firsthand, right? For many of them, maybe it was their first trip. They're getting taken out of their comfort zone. Maybe God's taking you out of your job, out of a relationship, out of the place you've lived all your life. And the thing about it, when God's taking you from something, we don't always know the what that he's taking us to, right? We don't always know that. That can be tough, right? I like to know. I want to know the 411. I want to know the plan. What's the skinny? But when God's taking us from place, often we don't know what's next. We just know that he's taking us from something. But the good news, when he's taking us out of places, out of spots, is that he doesn't take us to deprive us of something. That whatever right now in your life that you feel like God is taking from you, he doesn't take to deprive. He takes in order to bless. Or he takes in order to bless. And when God is blessing you, it makes everything worthwhile, doesn't it? I mean, those are good times, aren't they? Good times. Or maybe you've had at least one season in your life where you've experienced this blessing, where God's showing up for you. Things are working out in a way you're like, man, this it can only be God how this is working. He's working through you, showing up for you. Your prayers, you feel like they're being handed right off to the Heavenly Father, right from your mouth to his hands to do something with. Man, you're kind of in the zone, right? You're in the zone. It's good stuff when God is blessing. It's a wonderful place to be. But God doesn't bless us so that we'll just be blessed and we'll just sit there fat and happy. That's not why he does it. He blesses us to pass that on. And often he blesses us then to help us go through the breaking, right? Through the breaking. And what's interesting about this passage, recognize that it's only after the breaking that the people, that Cleopas and his partner, as they're going toward Emmaus, it's only after the breaking that they even realize who Jesus is. And sometimes it takes us being broken before we can recognize him as well, doesn't it? Maybe our pride has to be broken. Maybe our self-righteousness has to be broken. Maybe what we think, because of course we like to play God, what we think is right and wrong, and that's how it is, maybe that has to be broken. Maybe our stubbornness has to be broken, right? Maybe your self-reliance has to be broken. Maybe some of our dreams have to be broken in order for us to see Jesus, right? It's interesting, kids are experts at breaking things, aren't they? Kids break stuff. And they break stuff because they're careless. I know, I got 2 of them, right? They break stuff because they're careless. God's not careless when he breaks me and you. It's the opposite. It's part of a careful plan to help me and you be used by him to do incredible, incredible things. I got a chance a few years ago to hear Chuck Swindoll. Chuck Swindoll's a long-time faithful pastor, written many, many books that have blessed many, many people. And we're at this conference for young leaders, and Swindoll, they say, well, is there anything that you tell these young leaders? And he pauses for a minute, and he says, my prayer for you is that your talent, because you're talented, says that your abilities, because you got so many abilities, and you can do so many things, and technology allows you to do all this stuff. He said, my prayer for you is that all that stuff, and all your talent, and all the ways that you look good and are good and whatever, my prayer for you is that all that won't keep you from the crushing. Everyone's like, what? What's he talking about? And he says there is no limit to what God can do with a man, woman, or student that is being crushed, right? That is being broken, and that God can then use to do incredible things, because that's what happens after breaking, that God can then give us to the world. God uses broken people to do big things. You know how I know that? Because every single one of us is broken, and every single one of us are involved in the lives of others doing incredible things. And he's going to give you to the world, using you in the lives of others. One of the reasons I so love being a part of who you guys are, being a part here of Village, is that you embody our DNA, specifically being a safe place. Right? That's what we say about ourselves. We're Village Church. We are a safe place, that we are guided by grace and we are growing in truth. Because so many of you have come from a place of being broken, right? And you see yourselves as being used to bless others, right? That God is giving you to the lives of others. And God's a giver by nature, isn't he? John 3:16, God so loved the world, what did he do? He gave. He gave Jesus, his one and only Son. So if you're going through a time of breaking right now, the crushing, as Swindoll called it, recognize that you're not being broken because God's turned his back on you. No, it's because he desires to give you to the world, to give you to the people around you, to give you to your family, to give you to your workplace, to give you to your neighbors, maybe even to give you to your enemies. He will work through you to do incredible things. And as we move through these seasons, right, the taking, the blessing, the breaking, the giving, it could be that like the travelers on the road to Emmaus, we start finding Jesus showing up in the most unexpected of places, right? The incredible places. I've told you this story before, but when we left the church setting we were at, and as we were coming to Village, Andrew, we tell the story from time to time. We went to digging holes for my father-in-law, right? Did some good grunt work, and it was an incredible time. It was almost a time of being refocused on what God wanted to do in our lives. And one of our coworkers was, how can I describe this? He is one of the most incredibly raw and honest people I've ever been around in my life, okay? For good and for bad, right? He would, trying to think of how far to go with this story. He would come back, he'd go on a date with someone, and then the next day he'd come back telling me the stories of his evening, right? And I'd be like, whoa, how about that? That's incredible. I'd go home and tell my wife, and Beth would be like, what did you say? I was like, what was I supposed to say? Please don't tell me that, right? But he was so incredible. There's no pretension to him at all, right? No pretension to him at all. And I remember thinking during the time, I was like, man, this is crazy. Well, as I look back on that time now, I look at God preparing me to be back in the quote unquote real world. Because see, there's this thing that happens in ministry from time to time. We can so isolate ourselves with all the holier than thous, right? And we can lose sight that there are real people out there. Not that the holier than thous aren't real people. They are real people. They just need to get back in touch with their realness, right? And this guy helped me once again remember. It's like, oh my goodness. I wasn't hearing that kind of stuff in a staff meeting a few weeks ago, or in a deacon's meeting, but man, this is incredible. This is incredible. But what God was doing, he was using that guy to help me see the world around me so that I could then be a part of these seasons, the taking, the blessing, the breaking, and the giving. Jesus was showing up in the most unexpected of places for me. In the mouth of this foul-mouthed guy who was living this incredible life. All of a sudden, I was able to see Jesus and to say, you know what? Jesus loves you just as much as he loves me. And I got to be a part of this story. So where are you today? Are you in the taking? Are you in the blessing? Are you in the breaking? Or are you in the giving? Here's the deal. These patterns, they come and they go, and we move through them. But my prayer for you this week, no matter where you may be in one of these seasons, is that you will begin to see Jesus, right? Showing up in the most unexpected of places, traveling with you along the road as you go. And that your hearts will be burning and my heart will be burning and we'll never be the same. And we'll go out and we'll tell others about it as well. Let's pray together.